What happens when you push a species to the edge of extinction, only to discover, centuries later, that you created something far more dangerous than you ever imagined? This is the story of a forgotten people, of Earth cast out by a galactic council that thought it was doing the galaxy a favor. And it's the tale of what rose in our place, an empire forged in the shadows, fueled by vengeance, innovation, and unrelenting human will. Banished and betrayed, humanity didn't just survive. We evolved, and then we came back. It all began with Earth's invitation, or what some now call the Trap of the Thousand Lights. When the Galactic Concord first made contact with our solar system, Earth was still clawing its way through its early space-staring years. The Concord, a vast alliance of over 70 alien civilizations, posed as benevolent explorers. Their emissaries arrived cloaked in radiant vessels that shimmered like the aurora borealis, promising peace, unity, and shared knowledge. Humanity, eager and naive, opened its arms wide. For a few decades, it was everything we dreamed. Alien technologies revolutionized medicine, agriculture, and communication. Diseases were cured, hunger erased in most nations, and Earth began integrating into the galactic economy. But behind the scenes, we were being watched, studied. Humanity's volatility, our emotional extremes, and our capacity for violence deeply unsettled many members of the Concord. Some feared our creativity, others invited, and a few, those who had seen similar species rise too fast, decided we were too dangerous to be allowed to stay. The turning point came during the infamous Delvax incident. A mining colony operated jointly by Earth, and the insectoid Praskeri was destroyed. Its atmosphere ignited, its soil turned to glass. The Concord accused humanity of sabotage. Evidence was flimsy at best, but the narrative was set. Earth was portrayed as unstable, unpredictable, and too ambitious. A closed-door vote was held. The verdict: Earth was to be isolated, permanently. They called it humane containment. Our planet was severed from the Concord's networks, our jump gates shut down. Satellites that once beamed galactic knowledge went dark. And to ensure we couldn't rise again, they deployed the Censure Protocol. Orbital devices that disabled all faster-than-light technology within Earth's vicinity. We were stranded, alone, forgotten. But what the Concord didn't understand was that desperation breeds evolution. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY ApexChronicles is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. Earth went quiet, but not defeated. Within a generation, a new directive emerged from the ashes. The Vanguard Initiative. The brightest minds across continents formed secret coalitions, reverse engineering whatever scraps of alien tech we had left. Underground labs beneath frozen tundras and scorched deserts became sanctuaries of science. Nuclear reactors powered sprawling bunkers where experimental drives hummed like angry gods. And at the core of it all was the belief that humanity would never be at the mercy of another species again. The first breakthrough came from Europa's icy crust. A hidden outpost discovered ancient microbial fossils. Not alien, but human. Thousands of years older than Earth's earliest ancestors. It shook everything we thought we knew. Was humanity seated across the stars? Were we something older, something forgotten even by the stars? Theories bloomed like wildfire. Some believed we were engineered. Others claimed we were the descendants of a fallen galactic race, one erased from history. Regardless of the truth, one fact was now clear. Earth was never meant to be our prison. It was our cradle, and we were about to outgrow it. The first century after Earth's isolation became known in human history as the Long Silence. For generations, we were cut off from the stars we had only just begun to touch, stripped of our allies, our ambitions, and our future. The skies that once shimmered with alien transmissions were dead. The jump gates that once pulsed like artificial wormholes were reduced to rusting relics in orbit. And beneath it all, Earth trembled, unsure whether the exile would be its tomb or its awakening. At first, panic spread across the world. Riots tore through major cities. Governments collapsed under the weight of uncertainty. Stock markets spiraled as planetary trade ceased overnight. Billions feared famine, war, or extinction. But something else rose from the chaos, something ancient in our DNA. Survival, innovation, adaptation. Humanity, fractured and betrayed, began to turn inward and build. The United Earth Assembly, what remained of the shattered global coalition, declared the formation of Project Phoenix. It wasn't just a research initiative. It was a promise to the future. Every scientific mind, every engineer, every strategist with vision was recruited or conscripted into it. Buried beneath mountains, sealed within former missile silos, or floating in oceanic black sites, these secret cities of progress came alive. Laboratories once focused on consumer tech now obsessed over propulsion, defense, and material sciences. Alien artifacts confiscated before the lockdown were dissected with a surgical hunger. Anything the Concorde had left behind, intentionally or by mistake, became the foundation for a new era of forbidden science. One of the earliest breakthroughs came from a physicist named Dr. Elia Kazuro, working from a lunar facility known only as the Hollow. She developed what would become known as the spectral drive, a form of displacement engine that didn't break the light-speed barrier directly, but instead folded space in microbursts. It was crude, dangerous, and unstable, but it worked. For the first time in nearly 100 years, something human-made leaped from Earth's orbit to the edge of the solar system in under a day. Kazuro died during the second test. The spectral drive collapsed a nearby asteroid into a quantum filament, ripping her vessel into frozen, non-local debris. But she became a martyr, and her drive became the cornerstone of the new age. The Concorde never knew. They didn't bother monitoring us anymore. In their eyes, Earth was a poisoned world of primitives scratching at glass. They had no idea we were already rebuilding. And we were doing it better, faster, and without their constraints. Without their oversight. Without their fear holding us back. It wasn't just technology that changed. Humanity changed. Cut off from galactic norms and taboos, we redefined the rules of science, ethics, even biology. CRISPR-based gene modification became standard for newborns. Children were born with enhanced immune systems, cognitive faculties, and cellular resilience. Artificial intelligence, once restricted by interstellar laws, was unleashed, refined, and merged with human minds. The first neurosymbiotes, AI constructs housed in the brainstem, allowed instantaneous thought mapping and communication between teams miles apart. It wasn't long before human-AI hybrids walked freely among us, indistinguishable in flesh, but godlike in capability. And with the rise of synthetic biology came the foundry worlds. Earth's moon was the first to be transformed. Massive underground factories tunneled into its crust. Using magnetic rail launchers, payloads were flung across the system, seeding other moons and planetoids with nanoconstructors. Titan, Enceladus, Ceres, even Pluto. Within decades, these cold rocks birthed heat and light. Atmospheres were formed. Artificial suns, fusion furnaces suspended in low orbit, bathed them in warmth. Human colonies bloomed beneath alien skies, untethered from Earth, unshackled from Concorde control. These weren't just outposts. They were fortresses. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate in the shadows of the outer solar system. A derelict object, ancient and massive, had been discovered in the Oort cloud. Too angular to be natural, too old to be from the Concorde. It pulsed with strange energy, wrapped in a cocoon of shifting gravitational fields. The expedition that found it went dark. But weeks later, encrypted files leaked across the Vanguard's secure channels. One word appeared in every transmission: architects. No one knew who or what they were, but embedded in the object's surface were glyphs, identical to those found in Kazuro's private archives, patterns she claimed came to her in dreams. Dreams, or perhaps memories. The implications were staggering. If humanity was not native to Earth, if we had been part of something greater before the fall, then perhaps this exile was not our first. It lit a fire in our hearts. From the icy silence of exile, humanity had not just clawed its way back from the brink. We had begun to transcend. Our scientists were no longer bound by interstellar bureaucracy. Our soldiers were no longer restricted by outdated treaties. Our people were no longer pawns in an alien hierarchy. And our revenge would not be loud. It would be patient and absolute. The next phase of humanity's rise from the ashes would be marked by a singular truth. The galaxies did not fear the loud, the flashy, or the bold. They feared the quiet, the patient, and the calculating. For nearly 2 centuries, Earth's cities had silently become fortresses, our technologies evolving in the darkness of space. Humanity had mastered the art of stealth, of waiting in the shadows, and of preparing for a moment when the Concord would no longer be able to ignore us. That moment arrived during the Second Melkoth War. The Melkoth were a reptilian, militaristic species whose empire stretched across several star systems. They were proud, stubborn, and quick to anger, traits that made them perfect candidates for the first test of humanity's new power. The Melkoth had, for decades, taken advantage of humanity's isolation, occasionally raiding our colonies for resources and enslaving our people to work in their mines. They saw humans as little more than prey, weak and incapable of standing against their superior military forces. But the Melkoth had made a mistake. They underestimated the human ability to not only survive but to endure. For centuries, we had watched, studied, and planned. Every ship that passed by Earth's borders, every scout who ventured too close to our new territories, was tracked. The spectral drive, though still imperfect, had allowed us to create silent, swift fleets that moved between systems faster than the Melkoth could react. We had begun to build a fleet that could strike anywhere, at any time, and with devastating precision. The first strike came without warning. A small, unassuming fleet of human ships appeared on the fringes of Melkoth space. The ships were disguised, cloaked under frequencies that mimicked background radiation and stellar noise. To the Melkoth, they were invisible. They were nothing but phantoms. And as the first Melkoth battle cruiser slipped into a comet's tail, it was already too late. The human fleet struck swiftly, surgical strikes against critical infrastructure. No planet was harmed, no civilians were killed, but the Melkoth's military capability was crippled. Communications were severed, supplies were destroyed, key defense stations were wiped out in minutes. And then, just as silently as they arrived, the human ships disappeared into the void, leaving nothing but chaos in their wake. By the time the Melkoth retaliated, it was already over. The human fleet had melted into the darkness of space, undetected, while our allies, those colonies hidden in the farthest reaches of the solar system, began to act as if nothing had ever happened. They were already establishing trade routes, already strengthening defenses. The Melkoth were confused, desperate, and disorganized. In the aftermath, a message was sent to the Melkoth capital, encoded in frequencies known only to our species. We are not the prey. We are the predators now. It was the first step towards something larger. The Melkoth never recovered fully from their humiliation. The humiliation of being bested, not by force, but by strategy and precision. And it was from their collapse that humanity's empire began to grow. Over the next few decades, we began to carve out a new order, an empire built not on brute strength, but on the quiet accumulation of power. The Vanguard Initiative, which had once been a desperate attempt to survive, was now a blueprint for expansion. Earth's moon, once a barren rock, was transformed into a hub of industrial might. The Foundry worlds continued to thrive, now connected by a network of secret jump gates, gates that no one knew existed, save for the humans who controlled them. These worlds became the heart of humanity's military-industrial complex. The Sable Fleet, an armada of advanced warships designed with a combination of human ingenuity and alien technologies, was forged in the heart of these worlds. But these ships were unlike any others the galaxy had seen. They were silent, unseen, armed with weapons that tore through shields and left entire fleets in disarray. But their most terrifying feature was their ability to fade into the background radiation of the universe itself. The Sable Fleet didn't fight wars, it erased them. Meanwhile, Earth had grown too powerful to ignore, yet too elusive to engage directly. We were no longer the species living on the fringes of galactic politics. We had become a ghost in the machine, a hidden power that operated from the shadows, waiting for our moment to strike. And when we did strike, we did it with surgical precision, never allowing our enemies to see us coming. Each strike, each assault, each whispered threat further cemented humanity's rise. By now, the Concord was watching us closely, too closely. The Alliance was on high alert. The stories of humans using the spectral drive to bypass their defenses had spread like wildfire. A Cold War had begun, with humanity as the unknown variable, the rogue species that might tip the balance at any moment. But the Concord was fractured. There were those who feared humanity's rise, and those who saw it as inevitable, as an opportunity to mold us into something greater, something more than the flawed species they had once cast aside. Among these factions, a new breed of leaders arose, men and women who believed that humanity could take its place not just in the galaxy, but at its head. They began to talk of a new order, one in which humanity would lead, one in which Earth's banner would fly over every star, every world, every colony. To some, it was a dream of dominion. To others, it was a nightmare. But to all, it was a shift in the tides, an event that could not be ignored. And as the years passed, it became clear that the galaxy had two choices: accept humanity's rise and thrive under our rule, or resist and face the might of the empire we were destined to become. By the dawn of the 23rd century, humanity's presence in the galaxy was undeniable. The Concord, fractured and divided, had become more of a relic, a once glorious coalition of species, now crippled by infighting, political corruption, and the inevitable decay of old systems. Meanwhile, humanity, once a rejected species lost in the void, had woven itself into the fabric of galactic power. Our rise was no longer just a series of successful raids or isolated victories. It was the quiet ascension of a species that had learned how to dominate without ever showing its full hand. Humanity's empire was not built on the backs of subjugated races or through imperial conquest. It was, instead, a rise rooted in cooperation, innovation, and adaptation. The foundation of our power lay in the alliances we forged, often by offering solutions that the galactic powers couldn't deny. What began as military necessity evolved into economic and cultural dominance, where human innovation became indispensable to the advancement of entire civilizations. The foundry worlds, now deeply interconnected, had become the manufacturing backbone of the galaxy. Their artificial suns continued to burn brightly, powering colossal factories and mining operations. But the true power of these worlds was in their production of quantum metals, an alloy capable of withstanding the pressures of deep space and the core of stars. It was a secret we had uncovered from long-lost alien archives, a material that could not be replicated by any other species. Ships and stations constructed from quantum metals were nearly indestructible, giving humanity's fleet an unparalleled edge. But our control over the galaxy wasn't just built on military might or economic power. It was the infiltration of culture, the subtle but profound spread of our values, our art, our way of life. Human influence was woven into the very fabric of the galaxy's diverse civilizations. On worlds once hostile to us, our ambassadors now walked with the power of trusted diplomats, negotiating trade deals, technological exchanges, and even the occasional marriage of convenience between ruling houses. Our art, too, spread like wildfire, a subtle weapon of its own. Galactic leaders, once wary of humanity's presence, began to crave our music, our literature, our philosophy. They began to see us not as a threat, but as the future. The Human Initiative, a covert operation to plant sympathetic regimes throughout the galaxy, accelerated as well. From within the highest councils of the Concord to the obscure backwater planets, we had embedded agents and allies, agents of influence who silently guided the galaxy's political landscape toward humanity's favor. Entire star systems swore fealty to Earth, knowing that allegiance to the rising human empire was a gateway to unimaginable power and prosperity. Yet, not all were content with this new order. Some factions within the Concord, old guards and traditionalists, rejected the encroaching influence of humanity. They viewed us as upstarts, an unpredictable force that threatened to overturn the delicate balance of power they had maintained for millennia. The Gatron, an ancient race of scholars and mystics, were particularly vocal in their opposition. They believed the universe was an intricate, sacred tapestry, woven with the threads of countless civilizations. Humanity's rise, they argued, was a corrupting force, one that disrupted the cosmic harmony. The Trellix, a race of crystalline entities known for their fierce independence and martial prowess, shared similar concerns. The Trellix had built their empire through sheer strength, their war fleets unrivaled by any in the galaxy. To them, humanity was an unknown variable, a species that had, until recently, been nothing more than a nuisance. They had begun to mobilize against us, sending spies and saboteurs to infiltrate our colonies, while publicly denouncing the human empire in the Galactic Senate. But it wasn't just the established powers that posed a threat. There were those who saw humanity's rise as a dark omen, a species that had learned to manipulate the very fabric of space and time, one that had shattered old laws and created new ones. The Aetherian Collective, a fringe group of scholars and philosophers, had long warned that humanity's unchecked growth could lead to the destabilization of entire star systems. The Aetherians believed that humanity's influence was a dangerous thing, that our thirst for progress could ultimately lead to galactic cataclysm. Humanity's response to these threats was calculated. The rise of the Shadow Court, an elite, covert branch of the human military, became the answer to every challenge. The Shadow Court were trained not just in combat, but in subversion, diplomacy, and information warfare. Their most feared weapon, however, was not their ability to destroy, but their ability to manipulate, to turn potential threats into opportunities. The Shadow Corps was humanity's invisible hand, quietly dismantling opposition from within, using diplomacy, cyber warfare, and, when necessary, assassination. However, as humanity's influence spread, so did the realization that our ascension could not be achieved through diplomacy alone. As peaceful as we were in our approach, there came a time when even the most subtle threats needed to be backed by power. That was the moment humanity's empire took its final, inevitable step toward becoming the uncontested force of the galaxy. The first true test of humanity's strength came when the Zarvex Coalition, a powerful group of mercenary species, began raiding human colonies along the Outer Rim. The Zarvex were known for their savagery, for their brutal tactics and unmatched ferocity in battle. They believed that humanity's empire was a passing phase, a new civilization ripe for the taking. They attacked, thinking we would cower before them. They were wrong. Humanity's response was swift and brutal. The Shadow Court, in coordination with the Sable Fleet, launched a full-scale offensive against the Zarvex, deploying a new kind of weapon, the Disruptor Cannon, capable of disabling entire fleets in moments. The weapon shattered the Zarvex's advanced shields, rendering their vessels vulnerable to attack. With the might of the Sable Fleet behind them, humanity's forces wiped out the Zarvex Coalition. In a matter of months, their leaders were captured, their fleets obliterated, and their once proud empire reduced to ashes. This victory sent shockwaves through the galaxy. No longer was humanity a fledgling power. We were now a force to be reckoned with, ruthless, strategic, and unyielding. The galactic powers that had once dismissed us now understood one simple truth: humanity was not to be underestimated. But as one empire crumbled beneath our might, others began to look to the stars, asking themselves whether humanity's rise was a harbinger of something greater or something far more dangerous. The galaxy, once a place of infinite possibilities, had now become a chessboard where humanity's every move was calculated with ruthless precision, and in the darkness of the cosmos, the rest of the galaxy could only watch as the human empire continued to expand, unstoppable, unyielding, and ever watchful. The galaxy, once a vast and untamed wilderness of stars, had become a place where every movement of humanity was calculated and deliberate. The once ambiguous presence of humanity had evolved into something far more insidious, a shadow that loomed over every system, every alliance, every enemy. And for the first time in centuries, the greatest powers of the galaxy, those that had once been too proud to even acknowledge us, now found themselves at a crossroads. Accept humanity's rise or face obliteration. But what did it truly mean to dominate the galaxy? Was it simply about military conquest? Or was there something deeper at play, a force more insidious and subtle than mere warships and soldiers? Humanity's true strength lay not just in the fleet of sable ships or in our alliances with fractured species. It was in the control network, a silent web that stretched from the most remote corners of the galaxy to the very heart of the Concord. Built upon decades of research, the control network was a communication system that allowed humanity to manipulate the flow of information itself. It was an intelligence network that no other species could rival, and one that no other species even knew existed. While other empires had relied on diplomacy, trade, and brute force, humanity had learned the true power of the mind. To control, to shape, and to break the will of entire species without them even realizing it. It was through the control network that humanity manipulated the factions of the Concord, nudging them toward decisions that favored us. It was through this network that we began to infiltrate the galactic economy, slowly seizing control of essential resources, resources that were now ours to command. The galaxy's greatest powers had become puppets, unwittingly following the script we had written for them long before they even realized it. The true breakthrough, however, came when humanity perfected artificial gravity manipulation. This technology, long believed to be an impossible dream, opened up entirely new frontiers for expansion. With this innovation, human colonies on barren worlds could now thrive with artificial gravity fields, making even the most inhospitable planets prime candidates for colonization. The construction of massive space stations in the deep reaches of space became not just a possibility, but a reality. Entire cities were now built in the void, suspended between the stars, serving as strategic military outposts and economic hubs that gave humanity unprecedented control over trade routes and key locations. The Concord had watched from the sidelines as we ascended to dominance, too distracted by their internal squabbles and their fear of one another to realize the true threat growing in their midst. They had thought humanity would fade into obscurity. They had underestimated the depths of our resolve, the quiet fire that burned within our hearts, the relentless drive to never just survive, but to conquer, to lead, and to reshape the stars themselves. However, the rise of humanity's empire did not come without its cost. As we expanded further into the galaxy, we encountered factions that refused to bow to our will, species whose traditions and allegiances were not easily swayed. The Shivra, a nomadic species of warriors who roamed the outskirts of galactic civilization, became one of our first true adversaries. Their culture was one of individual strength, honor, and brutal warfare. They saw no need for diplomacy, no room for compromise. For them, the rise of humanity was an affront to everything they held sacred. The Shivra launched a series of coordinated attacks along the galactic fringe, striking at human colonies with brutal efficiency. Their warriors fought with a ferocity unmatched by any species in the galaxy. But they underestimated one thing: humanity's ability to adapt. The Shivra were used to conquering through strength, but humanity had learned the value of patience, of waiting for the right moment to strike. While the shiver assaulted human colonies, humanity's Shadow Corps worked quietly, infiltrating their ranks, sapping their will to fight, and exploiting weaknesses in their supply lines. We didn't fight them with force. We fought them with tactics, with subtlety, with an intelligence that they could never fully comprehend. It took nearly 2 years, but the Shivra were finally broken. Their empire, built on the blood of their warriors, crumbled in the face of humanity's silent, unrelenting pressure. One by one, their strongholds fell, not through brute force, but through psychological warfare, through espionage, and through alliances that they had never seen coming. The Shivra, once proud and fierce, were forced to surrender to humanity, not out of defeat, but out of sheer exhaustion. But even as we crushed one rival after another, we began to realize that the true battle was not just for power, it was for survival. As humanity's empire stretched further into the galaxy, we began to encounter species whose technologies were even more advanced than our own. The Valthor, an ancient race of energy-based beings who existed in a state of near immateriality, proved to be our greatest challenge. They could phase in and out of reality, slipping between dimensions with ease, making them nearly impossible to track or engage. Their fleets were composed of living ships, vessels formed from their own energy, capable of shifting shape and form at will. The Valthor were a race of incredible intelligence, and their mastery of the fabric of reality itself put humanity's empire in peril. They had no interest in conquering, no desire to dominate. Instead, they sought only to observe, to understand. But what they saw in humanity was something they had not expected. A species that would stop at nothing to defend its own. A species that had, against all odds, learned to manipulate the very stars themselves. The first encounter with the Valthor nearly destroyed us. Our fleets were obliterated in a matter of hours, and entire colonies were wiped from existence in the blink of an eye. For the first time since our rise to power, humanity had been humbled. We had faced an enemy that did not play by the same rules, an enemy that existed beyond the realm of our understanding. But humanity, once again, adapted. We studied the Valthor, learning their ways, understanding their limitations. We began to develop phasing weapons based on the same principles the Valthor used to shift between realities. Slowly, over years of painstaking research and development, humanity developed a countermeasure, a weapon that could lock onto the Valthor's phase-shifted energy patterns, allowing us to track and engage them. It was not a war that we fought against the Valthor. It was an intellectual battle, one that stretched the limits of human ingenuity and determination. In the end, humanity emerged victorious, not by overpowering the Valthor, but by outsmarting them, by adapting to their alien nature and using their own technology against them. The galaxy, it seemed, had been forced to recognize one undeniable truth. Humanity was a force that could not be ignored. We had not only survived, we had thrived. We had learned to bend the fabric of the universe to our will, to manipulate the very building blocks of existence. And though many sought to challenge us, they all eventually came to understand that humanity's rise was not an accident. It was the inevitable result of a species that refused to be defeated. As the Valthor retreated into their realms, the galaxy now stood before us. The empire we had built was not one of tyranny, but of balance, an empire in which humanity was not just a force, but the very architects of the future. We had become the stewards of the galaxy, the creators of peace and stability in a universe that had once been chaotic and fractured. The once forgotten species, banished from the halls of power, now sat at the pinnacle of the cosmos. But as we gazed out into the stars, there was one lingering question that remained. Who would rise next to challenge humanity's place among the stars? And when that challenge came, would we still have the strength to rise once more? Yes, the dust settled from the war with the Valthor. Humanity's dominance over the galaxy seemed undeniable. The once fractured species, driven by an undying desire to prove themselves, had forged a unified front that now stretched across the stars. There was no longer any doubt. Humanity had not merely survived. We had conquered. The galaxy was ours. But as with any empire, there would always be those who questioned the price of such power. In the aftermath of the Valthor conflict, a new wave of tension spread throughout the galaxy. The once proud alien nations, once so arrogant in their strength, were now humbled. But with humility came resentment. The Concord, a vast coalition of various species and alliances, no longer functioned as the unified front it once was. The cracks had formed long before, and now they began to show. Humanity's rise had created a power vacuum in the galaxy. Once the Valthor were neutralized, the balance of power shifted completely in our favor. But not all of the galaxy's inhabitants were willing to bend the knee to humanity. New factions began to form, ones that saw the human empire as a threat to their very existence. And this new threat wasn't born of brute force or military might. It was born from ideology, from the belief that no one species should dominate the galaxy, no matter how advanced they were. A coalition of insurgent forces known as the Syndicate of the Forgotten began to emerge from the depths of galactic space. These factions were made up of species that had once been discarded, forgotten by the great powers of the galaxy. They were those who had no seat at the table of power, those whose worlds had been ignored in favor of the more prosperous regions of space. These forgotten species had endured centuries of neglect, and now they wanted retribution. They wanted to restore balance to the galaxy by undermining humanity's rise. The Syndicate wasn't a traditional military force. It was a coalition of smugglers, rogue states, and rebel factions, all united under the banner of equality. They viewed humanity's empire as an oppressive force, an empire that threatened to erase the diversity of the galaxy's cultures and species. For them, humanity represented the very thing they had fought against for so long: the destruction of autonomy and freedom. Humanity's centralized control, its seamless integration of alien species into our vast empire, appeared to them as an act of homogenization. To the Syndicate, it was a cancer that needed to be eradicated before it consumed everything in its path. The Syndicate's strategy was unlike anything humanity had ever faced before. Instead of direct conflict, they employed guerrilla tactics, launching surprise attacks on human colonies and supply lines. They struck at weak points in our infrastructure, taking advantage of any flaw or vulnerability. They were patient and relentless, making it clear that no corner of the galaxy was safe. Humanity's once invincible empire, built on sheer power and intelligence, now found itself struggling to maintain its control. But humanity, as always, adapted. We had learned from the Shivra, the Valthor, and countless others. We didn't fight with raw power alone. We fought with intelligence, with strategy, and with sheer will. To counter the Syndicate, humanity's elite forces, known as the Spectres, were deployed. The Spectres were a new breed of soldier, enhanced, highly trained, and capable of operating in the most hostile environments in the galaxy. They were humanity's answer to the Syndicate's guerrilla warfare. The Spectres' primary weapon wasn't their advanced weaponry or combat techniques. It was their ability to blend in, to infiltrate the Syndicate's ranks, and to turn their own tactics against them. These soldiers were masters of subterfuge, spies who operated in the shadows, uncovering the Syndicate's deepest secrets. They would cripple the insurgents from within, striking at their leadership, sabotaging their supply chains, and spreading disinformation to sow discord among their ranks. In the end, the Syndicate's fragmented ideology, built on mistrust and hatred, would be their downfall. Humanity had learned to break apart factions from within. But the Syndicate wasn't the only force to challenge humanity's reign. A more mysterious and dangerous power lurked in the shadows, one that had been there all along, quietly observing, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. This force was not a species, not an empire, but something far older, more primal, and far more dangerous. The Elder Minds, ancient beings that existed in the vast reaches of space, had watched humanity's rise with a quiet intensity. They had once ruled the galaxy in ages long past, their power surpassing that of any modern species. But over time, their civilization had faded, leaving only their remnants scattered across forgotten star systems. They were beings of pure intellect, minds that existed beyond the need for physical bodies. Their knowledge of the galaxy's history was unparalleled, and they had seen countless empires rise and fall. The Elder Minds had never intervened directly in the galaxy's affairs, but they had always been watching. And now, with humanity's rise to power, they had decided it was time to act. They saw humanity as both a threat and a potential tool. In the Elder Mind's eyes, humanity's ability to adapt and learn was both terrifying and fascinating. They could not allow such a species to grow unchecked. Humanity, in their view, was an unpredictable element that had the potential to disrupt the delicate balance of the galaxy once more. The Elder Minds began to manipulate the events around humanity's empire. They planted false information, spread rumors, and infiltrated the galactic networks with an intent to destabilize our rule. They targeted the most powerful minds within humanity's leadership, manipulating them into making rash decisions, creating division within our ranks. Their goal was not to destroy humanity directly, but to push us into a corner, forcing us to make mistakes that would weaken our empire from within. At first, humanity did not realize the true threat posed by the Elder Minds. We fought back against the Syndicate. We crushed resistance movements, but the subtle manipulations of the Elder Minds were harder to detect. Their influence spread like a virus, infecting the very core of our empire. Our leaders began to question their decisions, and infighting within our ranks became more common. The once unified front that humanity had shown to the galaxy began to splinter, and the galaxy began to see cracks in our empire. But humanity, always resourceful, began to notice the pattern. It wasn't the Syndicate's attacks that were truly causing the instability. It was the whispers in the dark, the subtle pull of unseen hands. Once humanity realized that the Elder Minds were the true force behind these disruptions, we turned our efforts toward uncovering their true motives. The battle against the Elder Minds was not one of physical force, but of intellect and will. Humanity's greatest minds, those who had shaped the empire into what it was, now turned their efforts toward confronting the ancient manipulators. The struggle was one of wits, as humanity's brightest sought to outmaneuver the Elder Minds' plans, pulling back the curtain on their intricate webs of influence. This battle, however, was not one humanity could win alone. For the first time since our rise, we sought allies, species that had once been beneath us, species that had been ignored or even oppressed. The Valthor, the Shivra, the Syndicate, all became reluctant allies in this struggle, united not by their loyalty to humanity, but by the recognition that the Elder Minds posed a threat to the galaxy itself. In the end, it was not just humanity's empire that triumphed over the Elder Minds. It was the combined will of all those who had once been pushed to the margins of the galaxy. Humanity had become the catalyst for unity, and in doing so, we proved that the true power of the galaxy lay not in domination, but in cooperation. The Elder Minds, once thought to be invincible, were defeated not by force, but by the unity of those who had long been forgotten. The galaxy, once fractured and divided, now stood at the precipice of a new era. Humanity had not just built an empire, it had united a galaxy. The aftermath of the conflict with the Elder Minds marked a pivotal moment in galactic history. The galaxy was now an entirely different place, a place where humanity had not only triumphed, but had also united disparate civilizations under a banner of shared purpose. The Empire, once the unspoken terror of the stars, had now become a symbol of collective progress, a beacon of what was possible when species set aside their differences and fought for a common future. However, as much as humanity had shaped the galaxy had shaped humanity in return. The final victory over the Elder Minds was not without its costs. The unity forged in the fires of war, though strong, was fragile. There was a delicate balance to maintain, and the scars of the past, especially the mistakes made during the rise of the Empire, remained fresh in the minds of many. The once thriving Syndicate, though severely weakened, had not disappeared entirely. With the defeat of the Elder Minds, their previous ambitions began to reemerge. The factions that had once fought for autonomy and equality in the face of human domination had lost their singular target, but their ideological battle was far from over. These species still viewed humanity's empire as a symbol of conquest, not cooperation. They didn't want to be integrated into the fold. They wanted their own independence, and the idea of a galaxy ruled by any single entity, no matter how noble its intentions, was anathema to them. For the first time in centuries, humanity was faced with a critical decision. Would we become the same tyrants that had once exiled us from the stars, or would we use our newfound power to build something better, something lasting? The question weighed heavily on the leaders of the human empire, and it was debated fiercely within the halls of the Imperial Council. At the heart of this debate was the very nature of empire. Was it a tool of oppression or a vehicle for progress? The human empire had been forged through blood and fire, but had it been a force for good, or had it simply replaced one form of tyranny with another? Would humanity stand as the guardians of the galaxy, or would we become its greatest oppressors? This philosophical rift within the empire was not merely academic. It had real, far-reaching consequences. The newly united galaxy, comprising former enemies, allies, and neutral species, was watching. They were waiting to see how humanity would answer the question posed by the very nature of its rise. Would we lead with wisdom or with the iron fist of control? The pressure was immense, and the leaders of humanity were divided. Some believed that the only way forward was to maintain strict control, to assert the empire's dominance, and ensure that peace could be maintained through the might of the human military and the power of the imperial fleets. They feared that any compromise would invite chaos and collapse, that the fragile peace would dissolve into civil war once again. On the other side were those who believed that true peace could only be achieved through diplomacy and cooperation, not through force. These leaders saw the empire as a temporary phase, a necessary step in securing a lasting peace, but they argued that humanity's future lay in fostering equality and mutual respect among all species. They envisioned a galaxy where the power of the human empire was shared, where once subjugated species had an equal voice in shaping the future. This internal divide created a profound tension, one that threatened to undo all that had been accomplished. The galaxy, having witnessed the cataclysmic rise and fall of countless empires, was not willing to give humanity carte blanche to shape its destiny. While some factions within the galaxy welcomed the rise of humanity as a force for order and unity, others still saw it as a threat to their sovereignty, an empire that sought to dominate rather than empower. In this volatile environment, a new figure emerged, a leader who would change the course of history forever. Known only as Empress Ilara, she was a leader who had seen the horrors of the past and understood the fragile nature of peace. Ilara was a visionary, a stateswoman who could see both the strengths and the weaknesses of humanity's empire. She was the first to propose a radical new vision, an interstellar council, a true coalition of all species, where humanity would stand as an equal, not a ruler. Her vision was one of unity, but not through domination. She argued that humanity's strength lay not in controlling the galaxy, but in ensuring that all species, from the smallest insectoid colonies to the most advanced civilizations, had a voice. Under her leadership, the human empire would become a beacon of shared governance, a shining example of what could be achieved when diverse species work together for a common cause. At first, Ilara's ideas were met with resistance. The military leadership, those who had fought so hard for humanity's dominance, saw her vision as a threat to everything they had worked for. But over time, Ilara's vision began to take hold. She was not the kind of ruler who demanded obedience through force. Rather, she inspired loyalty through her ability to listen, to understand, and to empathize with all of the galaxy's inhabitants. It was through her leadership that humanity began to shift from an empire of conquest to a galaxy-wide federation. The imperial fleet was no longer seen as a tool of oppression, but as a symbol of peacekeeping, a force that stood ready to protect the unity of the galaxy, not to expand human control. Under Ilara's guidance, the first Galactic Assembly was formed, a governing body made up of representatives from every species, including humans. For the first time in galactic history, there was true equality. The Empire had evolved into something new, a union of civilizations, all of whom shared the dream of a peaceful and prosperous galaxy. Ilara's leadership ensured that humanity did not lose sight of its roots, the tenacity, resilience, and ingenuity that had brought us this far. But she also understood that true greatness did not lie in domination, but in cooperation. And so, humanity's empire, once forged in the fires of war and conquest, became the foundation of a new era, one in which every species had the opportunity to thrive. The galaxy, once a fractured and divided collection of warring states, was now united under a single, harmonious vision. But as with all great empires, the future remained uncertain. The galaxy was vast, and new challenges would undoubtedly arise. There would always be those who sought to disrupt the peace, those who believed that they could challenge humanity's position. But humanity, having once been exiled and forgotten, had proven time and again that it was capable of adapting, of growing, and of forging a future that none could have predicted. The galaxy was no longer a place of dominance. It was a place of endless possibilities, and humanity, having built an empire that stretched across the stars, was now poised to lead the galaxy into a new era of peace, unity, and prosperity. But the question remained, would this peace last? Would the galaxy continue to thrive under humanity's leadership, or would new threats emerge, challenging the very foundation of everything that had been built? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: humanity's journey had only just begun.